We will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come.
For 20 years, the rhetoric reigned.
What the government has done is stop the boats.
The asylum seeker who arrives in Australia by boat will have no chance of being settled in Australia as refugees.
They're not coming to Australia, and the advocates can bleat all they want.
You will never live in Australia.
But overnight, 2 decades of settled immigration policy, a proven vote winner, was upended by the highest court in the land.
Yesterday, the High Court ended indefinite immigration detention in Australia.
The High Court taking just minutes to order the immediate release of a stateless Rohingyan, known only as NZYQ, facing the prospect of life in immigration detention.
He has nowhere safe to go. There's nowhere else that he can be deported to.
Arriving by boat in 2012, he pleaded guilty to sex offences against a child in 2015, and his asylum application was denied in July 2020, the government arguing he should stay in detention until it finds a suitable country to send him to. The court disagreed.
The High Court decided that it's unlawful and unconstitutional for the government to continue to detain a person once there is no real prospect that that person will actually be deported in the foreseeable future.
The decision means hundreds of other detainees are now set to be released.
92 is the number of people that would likely be immediately impacted by this decision, but we know that there are over 100 people in immigration detention who have been there for longer than 5 years.
Government lawyers warning of undefendable compensation claims from detainees as the opposition demands safeguards for the community.
The government should have had a plan B ready to go. The Senate is sitting today. The opposition would have facilitated passage of any bill to remedy this and to protect the Australian community, but we've heard nothing from the government.
We are considering the implications of the judgment carefully and will continue to work with authorities to ensure community safety is upheld.
Long-term detainees, meanwhile, are just looking forward to their freedom.
We would really like to see the government act really quickly to implement the decision of the court to not waste any extra day of these people's lives.
Abul Rizvi was a senior official in the Department of Immigration from the early 1990s to 2007. Abul, what kind of asylum seekers are impacted by this decision?
I think the people most likely impacted will be those who arrived by boat between 2007 and 2013. During that period, approximately 31,000 people arrived by boat and sought asylum. The vast bulk of those people have been released into the Australian community, either on temporary protection visas or bridging visas. We have something like 150 people still left in detention, plus some more in community detention. It'll be that small number that will be affected by this. What would have happened that they arrived in Australia, they would have applied for protection, they would have been held in detention at the point of arrival, and they would have never been released until now because they had either some sort of character issue or some sort of national security issue.
One of these men is a child sex offender. What happens when he's released into the community?
Well, I think he'll be released into the community, firstly, with some sort of support arrangements, because he's been in detention so long, his capacity to find a job would be limited in the early days. But secondly, I think there will be strict monitoring and reporting arrangements put in place, and the government will be very, very careful about what this person does whilst he's in the Australian community.
So, Abul, what does this decision mean then for the immigration system as a whole?
I think fundamentally, and whilst the government will be having a heartache over this politically, because it will get attacked by the opposition when it implements this decision, but from a policy perspective, I can't see there was any other solution here. The idea that we were going to keep these people in detention for the rest of their lives is just a nonsense. That's just completely contrary to Australia's judicial system. And I think what the High Court has done is given the government an opportunity or a means of getting out of the quandary that it was in.
You were talking as though the High Court has effectively made a ruling that was obvious, that you couldn't keep detaining people indefinitely in this way. But of course, when you yourself were at the Immigration Department, they made a decision that went exactly the opposite direction. That's the decision that has been overturned today. Does that mean for 20 years you've been waiting for this moment to come along, that this was inevitably going to happen? Or is it a bit of a surprise that they've done an about-face like this?
It's not entirely a surprise. I think the earlier decision was slightly different because the prospect of that individual being resettled was still there, that was still available. Whereas for this individual, the prospect of resettlement is close to zero. And the government, and I think the High Court decided, well, you can't keep someone in immigration detention for the rest of their lives. That is unacceptable.
So the High Court says that's a constitutional bar, as in the government does not have the power to detain someone indefinitely with no hope of resettlement. The opposition, though, in its attack on the government today is saying that they would have legislated to get around this in some way. I'm just not sure what that would be. Is it possible for them to legislate against this?
I'm sure there is a lot of lawyers in the Home Affairs Department at the moment scurrying around trying to work out what options there are. But my fear is, or not fear, my understanding is this goes to such a fundamental aspect of Australia's judicial system. I'm not sure there's actually a way to legislate around it.
Abul, so do you think there's a chance that these asylum seekers will eventually be able to sue the Australian government?
I think there's a real chance that they will want to sue the Australian government. Whether that would be successful or not is another question. I expect the government may well legislate to limit its liability in terms of compensation. It's done that in the past, and I suspect it will probably do the same. In such legislation, I suspect it will have strong support from the opposition.
Abul, thanks for your time tonight.
You're most welcome.
And we reached out to the government for comment. A statement is on our website.